Okay, well, hello and welcome to our monthly Smart Water Solutions webinar series. My name is Sarah Melodic. I'm the Associate Director at Colorado State University's One Water Solutions Institute, and I will be your moderator today. Before we get started, just a couple quick housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, and we're going to post it to our YouTube channel. I'll share the link to that in the chat in case you'd like to subscribe and see what else we have to offer. All participants are currently joined with microphones muted and your cameras turned off. We're going to use the Q&A feature to address any questions to help keep us a little bit more organized because we're welcoming, it looks like we currently have 163 participants today. So use that Q&A feature. If you ask a question or would like to interact with our presenters, I will do my best to activate your microphone or camera if you're able to raise your hand. Today's webinar is going to dive into the key features of the Flood Potential Portal. We'll explore some real-world use cases and share best practices to help you streamline your workflow. And with that, I'm pleased to introduce our presenters for the day and turn this over to them to kick us off. Dr. Stephen Yochum is a hydrologist and civil engineer with the National Stream and Aquatic Ecology Center at the U.S. Forest Service. He's joined by Tyler Weibel, Associate Director for Software Innovation at Colorado State University's One Water Solutions Institute. So, Dr. Yochum, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. And hopefully everyone can hear us okay. There was someone who mentioned that they were having trouble hearing, but other folks said that they are able to. So we'll just get into it. So we're going to be presenting today on quantifying peak flood discharges for design and planning using the Flood Potential Portal. So I'd first like to acknowledge collaborators in this project with One Water Solutions Institute at Colorado State University and the National Stream and Aquatic Ecology Center at the U.S. Forest Service. So the Flood Potential Portal is based upon the flood potential method. This is a procedure that fosters the comparison, visualization, and communication of flood hazards. It provides enhanced understanding of riverine floods and how these events vary across regions and over time to better protect lives, property, and infrastructure. It utilizes 1.5 centuries of observational and streamgage data collected across the United States. It monitors how floods are changing over time, nonstationarity, using 8 different trends in flood magnitudes, frequency, and flashiness. And it predicts expected flood magnitudes for design and planning. So the flood potential method utilizes regressions of maximum recorded discharges of more than 8,200 stream gauges across 207 zones of similar flood response. These regressions are the central tendency of large floods. If you look at this plot here for zone 106 in the green and white mountains of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, the expected flood potential is the dark gray line. It's the central tendency of large floods. The 90% prediction limit of these regressions is the maximum likely flood potential, but floods greater than this being extreme and departure above that lighter gray line indicating the degree of extremity. So we can see for the zone 106 in New England, the 2 different points that happened in August of 2011 were what were the most extreme that has occurred in that zone. Indices are used for comparing flooding characteristics between zones and to test for trends. These indices are shown in the Flood Potential Portal. And these regressions have a high explained variance with an average R-squared of 0.93. So the flood potential method provides baseline and trend information on large floods based upon the observational record. By large, we mean relevant for infrastructure design and maintenance and floodplain management. And we also detect trends in a full range of annual peak discharges using probability quartiles. The method provides information to help practitioners make more informed decisions in an efficient manner, and it's based upon observation, based upon stream gauge data, rather than problematic numerical simulations of climate and hydrology. So the Flood Potential Portal is a decision support system for enhancing the understanding of riverine flood hazards in the United States. It was developed by One Water Solution Institute at Colorado State University. This is in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering, and the U.S. Forest Service, the National Stream and Aquatic Ecology Center, which is now at FSIC. This is a one-stop shop to help users understand flood variability and make flood magnitude predictions at user-selected points of interest. The URL is provided here, and when a user goes into it, a token is automatically added. It provides for a unique session. When you bookmark this, make sure you bookmark it without the token. You don't want to keep on referring back to that one individual use. So the Flood Potential Portal provides tools for comparing and communicating how flood magnitudes vary over space. It reports and observed trends in the magnitudes, frequency, and flashiness of floods. It illuminates flooding patterns from continents and regions all the way down to watersheds and catchments. And it provides predictions of peak flood magnitudes for infrastructure design and floodplain management at both ungaged locations and stream gauge locations. Here's the primary supporting references. The Flood Potential Portal was published in River Research and Applications last summer. Tyler and I also have a publication in review right now on bias and peak flood estimates.
So the Flood Potential Portal is made up of 4 primary modules. The mapping module to explore some of the variability across the flood potential zones, cross-section analysis, an ungaged watershed analysis, and a stream gauge analysis section. Go ahead and advance. This all sits inside of the Catena Analytics web platform here at the One Water Solutions Institute, or OWSI. You'll see that acronym representing our name in a few of these diagrams. The point is that this web infrastructure system sits on a cloud inside at CSU and leverages both internal and external models, internal and external data sets, some leverage from the Forest Service, some from USGS, some from other locations for various pieces that are needed to calculate and automate a lot of the features across this dashboard. This diagram kind of illustrates kind of the user experience end from your laptop, your smartphone, your desktop, all the way down into the weeds on the models and data sets. Go ahead and advance. We've built a number of different DSSs over the years for a variety of different clients. This includes the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We've got a water quality DSS and suite of tools for them. We've built one for the Missouri River Recovery Program with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we've got one with a collaborative effort between the U.S. Geological Survey and U.S. Forest Service on ecosystem habitat assessment for flow regimes. And this is all kind of the point of the Catena Analytics platform, is to unify and kind of do these big scale DSS web tools. Go ahead and advance. Embedded in the Flood Potential Portal are links to a user manual. There's an expansive set of examples and interpretation for how to not only use the tool, but interpret the results across a number of different examples and zones. Go ahead and advance.
So the far left column provides primary tabs for interacting with the Flood Potential Portal. We have the Home tab, the uppermost one. The second one down is the Mapping tab. This is where users can gain understanding regarding the status of and trends in flooding in the areas that they're working in. The default attribute is the Flood Potential Index, and that's what's shown here in the screenshot. Zone attributes are selected on this second to left column, the wider left column, where zone attributes are selected. And so for the flood potential index, the warmer the color, the higher the value indicates higher flood potential. That is, larger flood magnitudes inherently occur in these areas. The lower the value, the cooler the color, the lower the flood potential, lower flood magnitudes are experienced in these other areas. So we have higher flood potential along the West Coast, along the central and southern Midwest and Texas, and in portions of the Appalachians and areas, at least on the southern side of things, west of the Appalachians. We have moderate flood potential in the southwest, and low flood potential in more of the northern tier of the country, and from the Great Basin across most of the northern high plains and across the Great Lakes states. So zooming in on a few different regions here we're zooming into the Mid-Atlantic. We show the Appalachians. You can actually see the shape of the Appalachians and the shape of these zone boundaries. Topography is a primary driver of higher and lower flood potential. There's a question, no Alaska coverage? Not yet, but tropical islands are coming first, and then Southeast Alaska, where we have gauging, will be coming. Here in the Midwest, we have actually the highest flood potential in the contiguous United States. Flood potential is actually higher in the tropics than in the contiguous United States. So the highest flood potential is actually in Virginia, around Charlottesville, and with a flood potential index of 74.3. One of the highest flood potentials in the United States is in Western North Carolina, which in September of 2024, we were all very much reminded that big floods have repeatedly occurred in this area. Tropical cyclones have hit in this area in 1940 and 1916, so it's been a while. But Helene was not unprecedented, with a flood potential index of 69.5. Going to the southern Midwest in Texas, another hotspot for flooding. We have the Bascones Escarpment on the edge of Texas Hill Country, west of Austin, north of San Antonio. That has some of the highest flood potential in the United States. The Ouachitas are a big hotspot for floods in Arkansas and in eastern Oklahoma. Also can't leave out the Ozarks, the Mark Twain, the Ozark and San Francisco National Forest. And in the West Coast, the highest flood potential is in the Los Angeles ranges, flood potential index of 47.4. And there's a reason why the Los Angeles River is paved. They get really big floods in the mountains above the city. So skipping down to another status attribute, the Richards-Baker Flashiness Index. The higher the value, the warmer the color, the higher the flashiness. And the cooler color, lower the value, the lower the flashiness. So we can see here that in the Southwest, it has higher flashiness, and as well as across the central and southern plains, we have higher flashiness. Lowest flashiness is across the Rocky Mountains, Great Lakes states. Bimodality index. Bimodality is computed for each stream gauge as the largest recorded discharge divided by the median discharge. And this latter, so the bimodality is highest actually in the southeast portion of the Black Hills. Bimodality is the lowest in these lower value, cooler color areas, like in the Pacific Northwest. Bimodality is important because when an expected flood from a hydrologic perspective occurs, it can be really surprising for folks who live in the area because it's so much larger than the typical annual peak discharges that occur. Here's flood seasonality. The most frequent months, month where large floods have occurred. And we can see on the West Coast that is during the wintertime with atmospheric river events. We can see across across the plains where we're looking at springtime, early summertime. As we get further east, we're looking at early spring, and then when we're on the East Coast, we actually see it's hurricane season. most frequent times for large floods. So as mentioned earlier, the flood potential method provides a systematic way for identifying and ranking extreme floods. And that's what these polygons are on this screenshot. There's on hover information available for each of these polygons. This is an on hover for a watershed and along the front range of Colorado. This is Jimmy Camp Creek at Fountain, Colorado. And this is actually one of the most extreme floods that have occurred in the contiguous United States. And the most extreme floods, there's hotspots for this. Along the front range of Colorado is one of them, as well as the Columbia Plateau on the edge of the Blue Mountains. And there's some other hotspots as well for extreme floods. So trends in floods. What's important is we think about both the status and trends of floods, how floods vary over space, how floods are varying in time. And this is due to, all kinds, this is nonstationarity in general, which is due to a number of different mechanisms. Here we have the largest quarter of annual peak discharges and trends in those. Reds are indicating increasing trends, blues decreasing trends, no color is no trend. So we see here that we have some hotspots in large trends in large floods that extend in from the Oregon coast through central portions of the Rocky Mountains. And then in the Midwest, Missouri and Arkansas are hotspots for increasing trends in floods, as well as portions of the Ohio Valley and along the East Coast. New England is a real hotspot for increasing trends in floods, as well as the Carolina coast and the Florida Peninsula. On hover information is available, providing plots to actually prove our point here. So you just on hover plots, you can quickly copy and paste and put into a report or just save as. Though they can be distracting, there's a button to click that off on the left column. Trends in the moderate quarter of annual peak discharges. These are more nuisance scale floods, 2 to 4 year return interval. Here we're showing, again, reds are increasing trends in this scale of flooding. So Midwest and Texas has a lot of increasing trends in these scale of floods, as well as New England and the Florida Peninsula, as well as portions of the Pacific Northwest. The bankful quarter of annual peak discharges, we can expect in these areas greater chances for channel instability, where we're having these increasing trends in floods, and these increases are quite substantial. In the northern Ozarks, we're looking at a 17.8% increase in this scale of flooding. Trends in frequency, we look at two different types. This is trends in event flood frequency, and we're seeing lots of increases in the Ohio and Mississippi valleys. And trends in flashiness. We have some increasing trends in flashiness in the Pacific Northwest, and a lot of increasing trends in flashiness all along the Gulf and Atlantic coasts. So now getting into the meat of things, design flood discharges. Large floods are inevitable for all stream valley locations, and such floods occur every year across the United States. Design and planning needs to properly account for expected flood magnitudes. Bridge and culvert designs and floodplain risk assessments require accurate peak flood discharge estimates. So if underestimated, bridges and culverts will be undersized and floodplain risk will be understated, resulting in excessive damage during floods and elevated maintenance requirements, structural failure and unexpected replacement costs, and avoidable fatalities. If overestimated, infrastructure projects may likely have needless costs and excessive floodplain regulatory constraints and costs to private entities. So standard practice methods for predicting flood discharges are reliable, but they are biased low at many locations. This is a focus of the paper Tyler and I have in peer review right now. The use of multiple predictive approaches is essential. It mitigates inadequacies inherent within each approach. The flood potential portal facilitates the selection of design flood discharges using 3 methods at ungaged locations. Flood potential method, index flood frequency method, and USGS regional regression flood frequency method, as presented in StreamStats. And observed trends are presented for decision inclusion. Tyler.
Thank you. In order to support all this, there are a number of different data sets and models that are integrated into the flood potential portal to help streamline all of this. So under the watershed analysis module, there's a couple internal data sets that we leverage, things like the flood potential zones, right? The polygons that you're seeing. We also utilize gauges, their associated watersheds and characteristics. We have a DEM, a digital elevation model for the entire country so that we can use that for watershed delineation, as well as automated calculation of average slope, elevation, a few other things like that, annual and monthly precipitation for the secondary predictors that are present in some of the flood potential method regressions. We also rely on a couple external data sets, things like NHC stream segments, so you can get a sense of where stream segments exist for some of the kind of tributary scale watersheds. Think Forest Service and a lot of culvert design, right? You're not on a major river for some of that work. Go ahead and advance. Those data sets allow us to automate all of these calculations. So internal to it, we have, like I mentioned, the watershed delineation off of that digital elevation model. We automate the regression calculations for flood potential method, as well as the index flood method. We're also tied in externally to a couple USGS products from the regional regressions or StreamStats API services, as well as the National Stream Statistics Service for the watershed characteristics that drive those regional regressions for a consistent internal consistency that we're using their watershed characteristics with their regressions as opposed to our watershed characteristics with their regressions. So those are all automated in the tool for an ease of use access, and we'll demonstrate this later. Go ahead and advance.
So we have, we're going to show a series of steps that we recommend folks go through for both the watershed analysis module and the streamgage analysis module. And we will be providing a PDF for this that y'all can reference later so that you know you have these steps right. Step 1 is to review the zone flooding characteristics. You need to understand what's going on in the area that you're working in, both the status and the trends and floods. Step 2, it's the tab for the watershed analysis is the second from the bottom from the far left column. Step 2 is in the map. You need to zoom into less than 1 to 10,000 scale and select the point. You delineate the watershed, and then you check the watershed boundary using various base layers. Step 5 is to run the watershed analysis, checking for consistency between the 2 watershed boundary polygons. There's one that ALSI computes, and there's another that the USGS computes in StreamStats, and then we import that. Step 6 is to record the results. Export to Excel is preferred. Download the watershed shapefile. Perhaps take a screenshot of the map. Step 7 is to select the peak flood discharges for design. The median is typically most appropriate. Some situations, the highest value might be preferred by the practitioner, but in pretty much all cases, the lowest of the 3 should never be used. And the user needs to account for trends and floods. For the design flood discharge, moderate scale floods, bankful scale floods, these things can all be important for different projects. Tyler?
Thank you. Beyond the watershed ungaged location section of the flood potential portal, we also have a stream gauge analysis section. So this leverages a lot of the data sets and automation for stream gauge calculations. Again, it has a number of internal data sets and external data sets, as well as automations that help make this easier for you, the user. Internal to the tool, we have the ability to store user-entered peak chart discharge information, which is distinct from the external data set where we're integrated with the USGS National Water Information System for stream gauge locations and peak discharge measurements at them. So you can supplement the gauge record if you have reason to do so, or a better data set or a local agency or something that's not included in USGS's data set that you can add. One of the key ones here for these analyses is that we also have generalized skew coefficient maps. Those of you familiar with the Bulletin 17B and Bulletin 17C methods are familiar with the Plate 1 national map, the bottom right one, the red one. That's a national course scale estimate of regionalized skew coefficients. We've also gone through and generated state maps from the number of data sets and analyses that have been performed at the state level since the mid-'80s when the Plate 1 was put together. So all of that is automated and integrated into the tool. We'll demonstrate that for how you use it, but go ahead and advance. Off of those data sets, we actually have the models themselves. We have the Bulletin 17B flood frequency method, as well as the 17C. This includes outlier detection. This allows you to analyze it using station skew alone or the weighted generalized skew using those maps that I just mentioned. 17C also allows default and override of both the discharge intervals and perception thresholds. That's kind of key to that particular method. But all of this is streamlined and automated in the front end, allowing a quick, comprehensive analysis of the stream gauge record. Go ahead and advance.
So we have steps laid out for stream gauge analysis as well. Step 1 is the exact same step. Review the status and trends of floods in the area that you're working in. Step 2 is to create a filter or a fence around the area of interest and fetch all the stations that the USGS has collected annual peak discharge data. Step 3, select the stream gauge. Step 4, plot annual peak discharge and inspect the record. Step 5, review the data for a 17B analysis. And step 6 is to perform that 17B analysis and review results. And it's going to have two different sets of results, one using station skew and one using the weighted generalized skew. Step 7 is to review data for the Bulletin 17C analysis. And this screenshot, we actually see that step. Review and adjust perception thresholds and intervals as needed, and populate the generalized skew. And this interface is accessing the same background software that is used by the other by the USGS, by the HEC software that implements 17C methods. So we're all consistently using the same computer coding. Step 9 is to export stream gauge analysis data and results. And step 10 is to perform a watershed analysis and to go through those steps because we don't want to rely only on the stream gauge analysis. We also want to bring in understanding of more general characteristics of floods in the area. Yeah, because stream gauge analyses may be biased. They're a little more biased than we tend to think they are. Step 11 is to select peak flood discharges for design. Choose from both the stream gauge analysis and watershed analysis results, accounting for observed trends in floods. So we're going to be going through an example, and I'm going to hand it off to Tyler for this.
Thank you. So we're going to run through an example. I'm going to steal the presentation from Stephen. Stephen, can you confirm when that's viewable for everyone?
Well, I can view it.
Okay, cool. We're going to run through a live example in Absaroka, Montana on the Stillwater River from start to end, following that stream gauge, starting with the stream gauge and going to the watershed analysis. So you can kind of see why we recommend all these different steps. So if we start on the landing page. There's a number of different references and resources here from the quick start and user guide, which are also linked up at the top that you can go use and review, as well as all the different sections of the tool that we've detailed down the left side of it. You got the home page, the mapping tab, cross-section analysis, watershed analysis, stream gauge analysis. So if we start at that very first one on the mapping tab, you can get a view of the map. You've got the different zones that the different metrics that you can present per zone on the map. We're going to use this map tool, right? You can zoom in to previous extents, change your base layer, zoom in, zoom out. We're going to just zoom on into Absaroka, Montana for our example, which will take us to the screenshot you saw in Stephen's presentation slide. We're actually interested at analyzing the hypothetical, what if we're designing a replacement for this county bridge kind of downstream of the town, and seeing what's here. This particular watershed, through prior knowledge, sits on top of zone 46 and 48, flood potential method. So you'll notice there's a downstream zone and an upstream zone. You can click on the map to get that information. It'll zoom you out to the entire extent of that zone while its characteristics are loaded, and then pop open a summary panel of all the different metrics for flood potential, for flashiness, for trends, for all the different pieces. But we're going to start with reviewing zone 48, then review zone 46 shortly. You can also use the left panel to switch between these zones. So you can, if you know the zone by name, you can go pick zone 48, go pick zone 46. Manually, again, it'll go pick that content, load it. Give that a moment. Like Stephen mentioned, if you don't want to include the trend plots, you can turn them off here. If you do or don't want to see the National Hydrography dataset for stream locations, you can turn that off. You can see the utilized gauges, extreme watersheds. You can toggle your units from SI to imperial, depending on what your preference is. You can adjust things like label color, map opacity, and of course, you've got the legend in the bottom corner for what's being presented in the tool. Once the data is loaded for that particular zone, you'll see a nice little summary. This is the Great Plains transition, zone 48. You've got its flood potential metric. You've got its Richard Baker flashiness. You've got all the different ones. You've got the flood potential regression for area only, the one using the secondary predictor, in this case, the 10th month precipitation, right? So mean average watershed precipitation in October. You also have the same regression equations and their coefficients for the index flood method, the dominant flooding month, all the things that we reviewed at the beginning. What I'm going to highlight here while we're on this zone is some of the trends down here, right? So trends in the largest 5%, trends in the top quarter, trends in the other ones. So there's a potentially increasing trend in the largest quarter of floods here. If I run that same analysis for zone 46, we're going to see that when that comes back, that there are significantly increasing trends in the majority of those flood categories, which is something we're going to pay attention to as we go through this example. But I'll give that a moment to load. To address one comment while I'm on this map, you'll notice there's a little hole in the map over here for flood potential methods, or flood potential coefficients for this one. There are a few places in this country that are excluded from analyses for insufficient data or various other reasons. You can think as being in an area that's too highly controlled. So think of like downtown New York City. There's a lot going on there that isn't natural, as well as zones that just don't have enough data or consistent enough data to pull a trend from. So that's kind of some of the holes that are there.
That specific blank spot is actually the Snake River Plain, which has pretty unique hydrology.
Yep. Thank you, Stephen. Now that 46 is loaded, I can grow down and you can see that the vast majority of the top floods have significantly increasing trends that are about a 3 to 10% increase in the flood magnitude based on that trend, which is quite significant for analysis. Going back to the streamgage tab, right? Going through the workflow for Absaroka, Montana, we can hop back into our area of interest. I can define my area of interest using a number of different map tools. I'm actually going to use a rectangle just for simplicity around a big area. You can do a number of different other methods. You can draw a polygon. You can upload a shapefile or GeoJSON for those of you familiar with GIS backgrounds. You can also use things like known boundaries, like I know that it's within this city. I know it's within this county. I know it's within this Huck watershed. Once it's done, you're going to get a little pop-up here that has the summary of which gauges exist, right? The little orange ones down here. We've got a tributary, Rosebud Creek, above the town and Stillwater below. We're interested in Stillwater. You can click on the map, which will check this and make available the next step, or you can click the checkbox. Either works, kind of a go either direction from the map side of it or the table side of it. You can also on this table, you notice this is a hyperlink out to USGS. So if you want to go to USGS directly and review the data set, other content, other context, you can do so by following that hyperlink. You can also use these to zoom in on that particular zone or station. So I can zoom in and I know that's the one I'm looking at. Once you've picked one of those and plotted the annual peak discharges, you'll actually see the period of record that's available at that particular site. There's some statistics up at the top corner. You got, this is the Stillwater River at Absaroka, Montana. It's the one we're looking for. You've got a little add data button, right? So if I will have supplemental information, whether this is from state networks or other monitoring or paleo floods or all that stuff, you can add additional peak discharge measurements here. You'll notice that this particular gauge record is mostly consistent with one kind of recent outlier. In 2022, this gauge experienced a 16,900 CFS flood event that appears inconsistent with a lot of the other data at this record. Once you've reviewed that, the next step per the list that we reviewed is going through and looking at the inputs to the tabular 17B method. This will actually summarize every data point, flag whether it's a low outlier, flag whether it's a high outlier, flag whether you yourself added it or it's from USGS directly. Right, so you can re-review your data set. You also have the links up here to either pull the state map value for the generalized skew coefficient or the plate one. You can actually view that content and the data citation for it. So right in Montana, there's an updated map available that was published in 2016. We can use that updated skew coefficient. That's going to be a little bit different than the one from the plate one map. We'll stick with it and go ahead and run our 17B analysis and get our side-by-side results from our station skew calculations as well as the weighted generalized skew calculations. They're remarkably similar in this particular example that you've got a 100-year discharge of 13,000 CFS thereabouts, as well as the confidence intervals in the 17B method. You also get all the citations for the methods and the data sets down here in the bottom. Once you've done that, you can review the 17C method. This follows almost the exact same procedure as the 17B method for reviewing that information, except here you get to define your perception thresholds. It automatically adds one for the period of record, the gray one. It automatically adds one for any gaps in the gauge record, the orange one. You can review and override those. You can delete them. You can add more. Again, you can specify your skew coefficient. We'll stick with the state map and go ahead and run 17C. The point is the ease of use here, right? To go to USGS directly and reformat their content, to use PeakFQ or HEC FSP, there's a lot of steps involved getting to this point where we're actually comparing side by side the 100-year flow event for 4 different analyses, right? According to the 17B method, it's that 13,300. The 17C method actually comes up with a remarkably similar number. You'll notice it differs kind of down in the lower values. But the peak, the kind of 500-year event, is just shy of 16,000, which is still remarkably short of the observed 16,900 for the scale of what's analyzed here. So this is where we kind of shift gears out of the stream gauge analysis and go into the watershed analysis. We'll go zoom in on that particular stretch of river, pick the spot right under the bridge and delineate our upstream watershed. This is going to go hit a DEM behind the scenes. We have a 5 meter and a 30 meter DEM that we use across the country. Depending on the scale of analysis, we've got 2 different buttons. There's a delineate watershed and delineate large watershed. If you're doing some major river analysis, think the more big stuff, think the Snake River, think the Missouri, think some of those that are much bigger. You're going to want to kind of use that 30 meter DEM because it's going to be a little bit more easy to compute than the 5 and the 10 meters. So that's why during this review step, you can confirm my watershed. You can change your base layers either from this little quick link up at the top or on this side gear menu, and you can change your base layer to things like the hydro layer and look at, okay, I'm looking at the Stillwater River. Does this consistently include my tributaries? Does it delineate the right area? Did it grab an area that it shouldn't have? Right, this is an automation of a delineation. So you always have to QA that as you go as an analyst. In this particular case, it looks about right. You can change our map back to something a little bit more user-friendly to view. You'll notice now that we've drawn that map that you can see how it lies across zone 48 and zone 46. So that's where those 2 zones that we reviewed come in. and you can analyze that area. So what this is going to go do is it's going to go calculate the flood potential method. It's going to go calculate the index flood method, and then it's going to go calculate USGS regional regressions. Regional regressions takes a minute. So you'll notice that even though we actually have a result for both the flood potential method and the index flood method, that we are waiting on the result from USGS regional regressions while that one loads in from the external integration. You'll see that per zone, you have an incremental summary of how much of the watershed lies in that particular zone, any second predictor for the regression in that area, the value for that secondary predictor. So this spot gets 1.8 inches of rain in October. So that goes into the regression equation. You get a re-summary of the trends in both frequency and magnitude, right? So we've got significantly increasing trends in zone 48. We've got possibly increasing trends in zone 46. Frequency, and then we've got possibly increasing and significantly increasing in magnitude for the two. Then you'll see the expected flood potential, right? So this is the incremental total discharge that is anticipated from that, which gives us a total of 21,700 as kind of that target discharge or for this site with the flood potential method. Similarly, index flood has the same breakdown, uses the same zones. So you got the side-by-side zones, you've got its summary of its secondary predictors, and then index flood actually has all the different design discharges. You can compare the expected flood potential against the 100 year, so we can compare against this one, and you'll notice they come out remarkably similar, 21,700. Which is much more in line with the stream gauge value of the 22.9, or sorry, the 16,900 that was observed. It's much more in line with that compared to the stream gauge analysis. Once this analysis completes, you can see the regional regressions one. You can also go through and review kind of the overview section, which summarizes the composite, right, the combined indices for flood potential across that zone. So these are weighted averages based on that zone. The bimodality, Richter-Baker flashiness. You also have a re-summary of whether or not it's experiencing trends in the top quarter, in the moderate quarter, etc., for both the zone 48 and zone 46, as well as a side-by-side comparison of these are the results for the unadjusted value for expected flood potential, the trend adjusted value, as well as the index flood and the USGS equations. Once you're done with any of this, you can export these, right? You can export this to an Excel file. You're going to get an Excel file that looks just like these tables, right? The whole point is that these are similar. You'll see during this demo why we wanted to run this analysis to show kind of the difference in how quick StreamStats is, right? We have a lot of control over what's internal to us. We don't have a lot of control to the external APIs, but I'll spoil it. USGS regional regressions actually comes back with about a 6,000 CFS flood, 9,000, somewhere in that ballpark, which is significantly lower than all the flood values that are analyzed both at the stream gauge level, that expected 100-year event in the 13,000 range. The expected flood potential is 21,000. The index flood agrees with that at 21,000, and USGS regional regressions is remarkably lower than all of the 4 other analyses.
Tyler, as we're waiting for the StreamStats data to load, perhaps we should look at some of the attributes that different trends, for example, and how they differ across the watershed.
Happy to. So one of the things you can do down here in all of the different tabs across the tools, you can specify what you're viewing, right? Right now I'm just looking at the flood ID. I can switch to things like flood potential. But more pertinent to exactly Stephen's comment, you can look at the trends, right? So you can see how the upstream section of this watershed is experiencing a large, significantly increasing trend, right? So you can see the downstream section has a possibly increasing trend. Sorry, that's not actually that one. But you can toggle through these. You can look at the flashiness. You can look at the event flood frequency. You can look at the annual flood frequency, where you're getting those consistent trends. Now that USGS regional regressions returns, you can see that they're set up to summarize their zones, or regions more correctly. Their zones don't line up with our regions. There's various reasons for that. And you'll see it has a total for that one. Its 100-year event is a 9,600 CFS discharge, which again is the lowest out of the kind of 4 methods between flood potential, index flood, Bulletin 17B, Bulletin 17C, and StreamStats. It's the lowest out of all of them. So this is kind of that example that you don't ever really want to use the lowest. You want the context more analyses side by side to get more strength in your design discharge that you're picking. You'll also note that the map is updated with this yellow watershed boundary. And if I switch this back to just the zone ID, it's a little easier to see. You can see that there are some discrepancies between our delineation and their delineation that hop around based on issues with the DEM. These are big data sets is more than anything, and they vary just a little bit as you get to some of these sections for whether tributaries like this little draw is included in draining to this part of the river, or that part of the river, right? So you can review that for consistency between the two methods. If one of them erroneously delineates a bad watershed, go ahead and redelineate what spot you're on. That's kind of the full end-to-end walkthrough of that example, besides selection of the design discharge.
So what would you select? Well, actually, okay. Can you refresh my memory? What is the stream gauge analysis resulted?
Yeah, great question. I can hop back to it. It's all there. Stream gauge analysis has a 100-year event right in the 13,300 value across all four of the different 17B station skew, weighted skew, 17C, same. All four of them agree at 13,300, which is very low compared to the observed 16,900 from a couple of years ago. And then again, the watershed analysis comes up with a 21,000 for the flood potential, a 21,000 for the index flood, and a 9,600 for the regional regression. So right away, as an analyst, I would throw out the 9,600 event. That's falsely low compared to all the other data points that I have from the gauge record all the way up to the analysis of the gauge record and the other two methods. I would pick the median. I'd pick the 21,700. I think that's the most appropriate design discharge here. However, because of the significantly increasing trends present in both zones and the potentially increasing trends in both zones, I would go with the trend adjusted value. So I'd go with the 23,000 discharge as my selected design discharge for this site.
Well, thanks, Tyler. And that's, yeah, I think that's just a key takeaway here. The stream gauge analysis for this site, at least, seems to be under predicting. And USGS regional regression equations are definitely under predicting. So we'll just wrap things up before we go into questions and taking things back. Just some key caveats here for design flood discharge predictions. Thoughtful consideration results are required for the selection of most appropriate design flood discharge estimates. A well-educated and experienced hydrologist, floodplain manager, or civil engineer is required for this interpretation. The flood potential portal was developed to help with this decision-making, but it does not replace this expertise. So questions?
No. Sarah, do you want to recap some of the questions or unmute selected people that have asked them for kind of follow-ups? We walk through a few of those.
Yes, happy to do that. And I understand that there are some accessibility issues for the Q&A. My quick Googling tells me that in some cases it may depend on your organization's access structure or if you're logging in from a browser versus an app. So I've done my best to pull over questions from the chat into the Q&A. There's a bunch of questions coming into the chat right now. So I'm going to read through what I have just in order that they came in, and apologies if you actually have addressed some of these during the presentation, but I'm going to do the best that I can here. So early on in the presentation, there was a question about holes, no FPI. What do those mean?
So we addressed
like
that
one
one
of the first slides.
Yep, we addressed that one. That one's basically the gaps in the map for flood potential index. FPI is its short version there. There's regions in the country that are not internally consistent or lacking sufficient data to draw trends and analyses from. Stephen can comment on that one further since he's the one that performed all that.
Yeah, certain areas just don't have enough stream gauges. The stream gauges that are there, we just see that, hey, this is pretty unique, but we got like 2 stream gauges. And New Mexico actually has some of the most areas. There's all that are like that, but there's also other places like New York City. New York City is hydrologically very disturbed. And so we just excluded the New York metropolitan area from the analyses. There's other areas like that, like around San Francisco, but Los Angeles is included. Seattle's included because we actually see consistency in the flooding.
Okay, I'm gonna say that we probably have maybe 20 to 25 questions. So we'll do our best to fly through these in the 10 minutes we have. In Texas, stream stats doesn't work, but it does in the flood potential portal. Is that correct?
No, stream stats does not work in the flood potential portal either. We're actually trying to do a workaround on that issue, but no, we only have two results when you're doing an analysis in Texas. Louisiana is the same situation. Wyoming's the same situation.
But you do have access to the flood potential method and index flood methods across the country, regardless of the state.
Okay,
Other
and
than
I
those
think,
voided areas.
and this question I think you've addressed, but for posterity purposes, when you say highest flood potential, is that excluding areas like New Orleans or other areas that you've indicated that have no FPI shown?
Yes, that's an obvious yes.
Okay. How often is flashiness updated? Does this include recent wildfires?
No, as I think most of us here know, the USGS stream gauging network really doesn't catch up, doesn't really catch wildfire flood response very well. So generally wildfire hydrology is not well represented in the flood potential portal, nor is it well represented in stream stats. We need rainfall runoff methods is the appropriate method for actually dealing with that.
To answer on the flashiness side of it, one thing that we didn't highlight is we actually have a period of analysis per zone as to when the trends were updated, when the trends in frequency were updated, trends in flashiness were updated. So you'll know there's some updates here that we performed updates to a handful of zones really recently for trends in flashiness. So you can actually review per zone when the last time they were updated.
Okay. What is the DEM resolution? You may have mentioned this.
Yep, we got a 10 meter and a 30 meter behind the scenes. There are efforts ongoing to have a 5 meter and a 1 meter available, but they're not contiguous nationwide. So we don't leverage those yet in this portal. And for obvious mathematical calculation reasons for large watersheds.
Okay. I think the next one on my list we just answered. Is the program only using the USGS gauges, or do they incorporate any of the state agency gauges?
They only use USGS at this time. We have a separate effort ongoing to incorporate a bunch of state gauges. So Colorado Department of Water Resources has a number of gauge stations across the state. We want to pull those in. We're based in Colorado. So right now it's only USGS and the user supplemented data, but we're planning to pull in more.
Okay. And I think you may have walked through this a little bit in your example, Tyler, but based upon trend analysis, can you predict the discharge frequency curve into the future? For example, how much would the 100-year discharge be in 20 years?
Stephen, do you want to take that?
This is all looking at data that have been collected, not prognosticating future conditions.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you. So now I'm moving back into the chat for all the questions that started popping in as we open the Q&A session.
And Sarah, I mean, I'm fine if we go beyond the hour if it takes that long to go through the questions. So I know you're rushing, so don't stress.
I'm trying. I want to get everyone's questions addressed. Okay. I'm going to start at the top here. This tool uses gauge streams, which tend to be on larger watersheds. Using the flood potential index and flood index methods for smaller ungaged watersheds, I've seen some nonsensical data output. Are there recommendations for use or applicability on smaller watersheds?
Generally across the United States, we have a consistent power relationship across all watershed sizes. But as the questioner pointed out, there are fewer data for that have smaller watersheds area. There's fewer stream gauges, but the pattern seems to fit. Now that said, there are unique areas, and they occur here and there. And specific stream gauge data, if someone's doing a stream gauge analysis, they may see that they need to estimate higher than a watershed analysis is. And that's the key thing. We don't want to underestimate. We want to underestimate as best as we can. If there's like a small watershed with a stream gauge and it indicates larger discharges can be expected and what's predicted out of the watershed analysis, well, obviously we use the stream gauge analysis. But generally, the smaller watersheds fit the same pattern as the larger watersheds to a point. And the flood potential method is cut off at 10,000 square kilometers. What we see is there's a point in which as watersheds get larger and larger, the pattern shifts. And we actually have a cutoff for that actually prevents a user from applying the analysis beyond a certain watershed size. And that cutoff varies from from zone to zone.
Great. I think that answered a couple of these other questions. But similarly, what is, I think you just said this, the minimum drainage area the portal will process?
It varies by
That
zone.
also varies zone by zone. As you can see, zone 46, we get a minimum watershed area. This one is about 3/4 of a square mile. Maximum watershed area is about 3,600 square miles. So it varies zone by zone, but you can see that content on the front end. And in the watershed analysis, you'll get a little error message here that'll give you your area and then say, by the way, it's too big or too small to actually apply this method.
But that cutoff is actually not actually at that minimum value. It's actually 1/10 the size of that minimum value. So for that zone we're looking at, it's actually 0.076 square miles. So less than 1/10 of a square mile in which the watershed analysis module will provide a result.
And that was in an effort to get a lot of kind of culvert-sized watersheds looked at up in kind of headwater streams.
Okay. Does this platform support batch processing multiple points for watershed analysis, similar to the StreamStats batch processor?
Short answer is we actually do that behind the scenes, but we've never front-faced it to end users. We do it for our own research purposes. So feel free to reach out if you have a research question that we want to collaborate off of. That's probably something we can discuss pursuing, but nothing user-facing at this point allows batch processing.
And when it comes down to picking a discharge at a specific site for some sort of stream crossing, really it takes a human being to actually choose those numbers. So that's part of the design of the portal.
Professional judgment. Yep. Wonderful. Refreshing to hear that we're not soon to be replaced by AI. Okay, wondering about ungaged watersheds. Is this an improvement over StreamStats? Why would I use this over StreamStats for ungaged areas?
Well, we actually are providing the StreamStats results for peak discharge. I mean, StreamStats is a great tool. It's been around a quarter century now and provides all kinds of statistical information regarding points on most streams. But for when it comes to flood hydrology, that's specific to USGS regional regressions. And US regional regressions are great in some places and for some watershed sizes, but they seem to be biased. And this, I noted during the talk today earlier that Tyler and I have a paper in submission right now in review that really digs into this bias issue. So it's actually dangerous to rely solely on one method, any one method. You want to use multiple methods, so at least 3. And so what we're presenting in our watershed analysis tool are 3 different results, including the results from USGS regional regressions, what's provided from StreamStats. So you want to come here because it automatically gives you 3 sets of results, including what you're used to seeing from StreamStats. And you're also able to incorporate observed trends in floods, not prognosticating future trends in floods, because I don't know about you all, but I'm pretty skeptical of those results. But these are actually observed trends in what we're seeing in our stream gauge data.
Well spoken.
Okay. I'm going to bounce to a related question and then circle back. So the USGS regression equations contain lower and upper confidence intervals. Are those values calculated and presented in the model?
They are calculated, and there are error messages that show up when you extrapolate beyond those upper and lower limits, just like they do in StreamSats that says, by the way, we're not confident on that result. Yep, absolutely. They're respected.
Okay. How do you factor in trends of climate change with increasing total discharge or rainfall intensity in some regions?
Steven, you want to take that one?
Well, there's a disconnect between changes in rainfall and changes in flooding. There's multiple reasons why it's the case. We have bias, most likely, in our precip records, especially in more mountainous terrain, and plus it's much more complicated. You know, the world is not a paved Walmart parking lot. Our hydrology is complicated in that, for example, antecedent soil moisture is really an important component for understanding whether or not a flood is going to happen or not. For example, in late this past autumn in southern Missouri, there was a big rain event that produced very underwhelming flooding. You know, underwhelming from an hydrology perspective. Thankfully, it wasn't a big flood from their perspective, considering what happened just a few years ago in the same area. And the reason why they didn't get the large scale flooding that they expected was because of the antecedent soil moisture. That likely what's going on. The opposite was the case in Western North Carolina. They had high antecedent soil moisture whenever Helene really came in and started pushing up all that moisture up against the Blue Ridge Mountains and inducing those big floods. So, hydrology is more complicated than just rainfall equals runoff. Flood hydrology is complicated. So what we're doing here is we're subsuming results in actually what we're observing is in trends in floods, and presenting that here.
Okay, I know people are starting to drop off, so just as an FYI, I threw a bunch of links back in the chat that have been circulating, including the link to the YouTube channel, the tool, the project page, as well as our full webinar schedule. And I'm going to keep rolling with questions, but just wanted to note that those are in there. Can the user supplemented state data be batch added or only by one flow event at a time?
Great question. It can be batch added. So you can either upload a CSV file or you can do, there's tutorial information for how to copy and paste out of an Excel page that's properly formatted and grab 35 rows at the same time and upload it as a copy paste. So you can either do that and just paste into here and it's auto going to add the 35, or you can upload it as a file. So yeah, you do not need to manually enter each data point in a 100-year record or something like that. No. You can copy, paste, or upload it.
Okay, and a little knowledge sharing from Cody. For post-fire floods, WEP Cloud has the ability to upload a soil burn severity map for those estimates. So just an FYI for everyone and the project team. I am going to move us to a different round of questions because there was a couple iterations of this. Any chance this tool will incorporate reservoir routing in the future, especially for smaller watersheds and in ponds?
No. Really, rainfall runoff modeling is that's the method that should be used for that sort of approach.
Correct. This doesn't do any kind of flood wave hydrology down a network kind of analyses. This is a design tool for infrastructure, less about it rained 3 inches over there and 6 inches over there. What's my spot gonna do? This tool's not designed for that.
Okay, thank you. Sometimes adjacent zones have very different values for flood potential metrics. Do you recommend just interpreting results from the zone in a given site the zone a given site lies within, or would you also recommend considering nearby zones if zone boundaries may be imprecise?
Stephen, you want to?
Well, the zone boundaries are our best estimates given the data available at the time of that analysis. So we recommend sticking with these zone boundaries because you can start playing some games with manually using the equations, and you really need some real basis for doing that, basis based upon data. Now, zone boundaries change. With updates come shifts in zone boundaries. I'm actually seeing some of that in California, some of that in Iowa, some of that in North Carolina right now with new data. And so we update zone boundaries whenever the data collected by the streamgaging network supports doing that.
Good answer.
And to build off that, how often is the data updated with current hydrologic events?
We're on a cycle to update 30 or so zones a year, which with a focus on areas that have experienced large floods. So yeah, we're really looking at Western North Carolina, the Southern Appalachians right now. But the USGS isn't going to have those data available for probably a couple of years. But in Iowa, if you recall back in June, Iowa actually experienced some pretty big floods, and those data are posted. So we're focusing on those areas where these new data support updating. I was working on analysis this morning that was looking in New England, north of the White Mountains, and typically we're on about a 7-year cycle for updates, and unfortunately we can't automate that because zone boundaries change.
Yep. No more AI. Still got to be a person.
Okay. There was a question about culvert sizing that maybe we can come back to, and I believe you already addressed this, but I'm gonna just reiterate another reference to why someone would want to use the flood potential portal analysis. What does it take into account that StreamStats does not?
The short answer is other methods, right? StreamStats only presents StreamStats method. This presents 7. There's 4 stream gauge analysis methods plus the 3 in the watershed analysis section. So there's 7 different analysis methods presented here for a more cohesive result.
Plus trends.
Plus trends on top of that, right? So you can observe a trend in the stream network and apply that even to the stream gauge. If StreamStats is the most accurate output, apply the trend to the StreamStats output, right? That's perfectly allowable.
Okay. And then I think this is the last question. Apologies if I've missed anything. There's a lot of great activity, so pleased to see that. Final question, I believe, how do you suggest we size culverts or find Q in Texas, Florida, and Louisiana?
You want to take it, Stephen, or do you want to run a demo?
Well, we get our 2 sets of results. We provide those in Texas. But you're kind of stuck going old school if you want to get USGS regional regressions results, because you need to do it manually. I'm old enough. I used to do all that stuff manually, and it was standard practice. So if you want that third result with the current status of the flood potential portal, you'll have to go that route. Now, that said, Tyler, you want to jump off on this one?
Absolutely. So we have an ongoing research effort with Forest Service to actually automate automate USGS regional regressions outside of StreamStats. So we're doing a massive data literature scouring to pull all of those regression equations for all of the regression regions, automate their delineation, automate their watershed characteristic calculation, and embed that in the flood potential portal internal to our cloud infrastructure instead of an external resource, it'd be an internal resource, which one speeds it up. StreamStats' APIs are a bit slow. We've got different hardware, I think. And two, it allows for analysis of areas that haven't been automated that do or don't exist in StreamStats, right? So StreamStats regressions exist in Texas, but they're not automated in StreamStats. You can't get it through their dashboard or their API, but we will eventually have that when we finish all this other supplemental work for kind of a version 3 of the flood potential. You'll notice the flood potential portal is already on version 2. We've had incremental updates to it for the past few years.
Okay,
Thanks,
and
Kevin.
I have, oh, are we?
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Okay, I apologize to Dale. He asked a question in the Q&A and I skipped over it. But Dale is hoping, wondering if we can elaborate on streamgage bias and any direction or causes for that.
I was going to say, read the paper when it publishes, but Stephen, do you want to give a short version?
Yeah, streamgage bias. What seems to happen, and I'm not saying this in a definitive way, I'm saying this is what appears to be the case. In certain areas with stream gauges that have longer records, whenever there is a larger discharge than what typically has happened, it seems that the algorithms that are used in the 17B and 17C methods tends to bias the results low. But it's more complicated than that. And our journal article really digs into that. But it's more, and it's one of the ways it's more complicated is USGA's regional regressions also tend to be biased low. And that kind of makes sense because USGA's regional regressions, if you ever dig into those papers, are based upon flood frequency analysis for all the stream gauges. And if the stream gauges are in places biased low, then it makes sense that the USGS regional regressions would also be, or results would also be biased low. But in other places, or for other watershed sizes, USGS regional regressions provides the best number for a design. So, really, it just comes down to we want to use multiple methods. So we aren't using unknowingly a low bias value.
Yep, it's an improved context for better judgment rather than saying one method is better than another method.
All right. When the portal delineates a watershed, does the portal give all the characteristics that StreamStats does? And can we download the GIS files?
No to the first one. It does not automate the calculation of the other watershed characteristics. It only calculates the ones pertinent to the analyses, right? So the October precipitation, and the annual precipitation in this example is what got calculated on the fly. It doesn't calculate the other things like average slope or aspect or percent water bodies or any of the other pieces.
It's not intended to replace StreamStats. It's intended to actually focus on floods, where StreamStats has a more holistic perspective on presenting regarding streams.
Yep, that's a really good answer. To the second half of the equation, there's a button over here to download your watershed. So you can absolutely download that file, and it'll give you a file, zip file containing the flood potential. Notice the label. This is the watershed for the flood potential and index flood zone. Delineation, right? We're not downloading the StreamStats watershed boundary. We're just downloading the red one down here. That's us, not the yellow one that's external. Yeah, absolutely. You can download the shapefile.
Okay. Well, I think we made it through all the questions. And just as a reminder, these links have been posted, but we will share the presentation, access to the recording on both the tool and the project landing page. So if you want to choose to bookmark just one, maybe start with the tool because everything will go there. Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn, visit our website, owsy.colostate.edu. You can shoot us an email to reach any member of our team at owsi@colostate.edu, and we hope to see you all again. Next month, we run a webinar the third Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and I'm sure Stephen would also be happy to field any additional questions that might be outside our areas of expertise. Thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Stephen, and thank you all for joining us.